Battle between Texas and the federal government continues as the Texas National Guard installs more razor wire along the southern border. This is despite a Supreme Court decision that allows the federal government to continue to tear it down. So does Texas have legal standing to continue to defy the federal government? Joining us now for more on this is Alison LaCroix. She's a constitutional law professor at the University of Chicago. Thanks so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to understand this. On one hand, you have lawmakers who suggest and who get in front of cameras and pontificate about the need to follow the Supreme Court, for example, when it comes to the ruling on abortion, right? On the other, you have Republicans in Texas saying, you know, we should follow the Supreme Court, except in this instance where the state can defy the law of the land, which is the Supreme Court and the Constitution of the United States, because it's in Texas's public interest. So could a doctor in Texas say, well, I'm also going to defy the decision on Roe and perform an abortion?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. And I think one of the essential issues here is the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. So we have this in actual text from the Constitution, reiterated in multiple decisions over more than 200 years from the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supremacy Clause establishes a bedrock principle that federal law is supreme to state law. That's what it says. So the Constitution, federal laws, treaties are the supreme law of the land. That's the phrasing. And they take precedence over state laws. That includes state constitutions. It applies to state court judges. And the supremacy principle is a foundational rule of U.S. constitutional law and of our system of federalism. So the short answer, I think, to your question is no, they couldn't lawfully do that.
So I'm going to take it back a little bit to like sort of your fourth grade understanding of the Constitution, right? So the state and the federal government, they are responsible for different things. Among the responsibilities that fall in the lap of the federal government is immigration. Can we talk a little bit about what the consequences would be if every state could make up their own immigration laws? There's a reason why the federal government is responsible for this.
Well, exactly. And I think in the specific realms of immigration and border control, and indeed foreign relations as a whole, it's a long established principle going back really to the founding of the United States that the federal government has exclusive or very nearly exclusive power in those realms for exactly the reasons you say. I mean, there were situations before the Constitution was drafted where you had states saying that they could enter into peace treaties or having wars. This is before the Constitution. And the drafters of the Constitution were specifically concerned about that. So they gave those powers to the federal government. And that was clear really from the get-go.
So there are some who wonder if Texas Governor Greg Abbott has legal standing in this situation. It sounds like you're saying he does not. And without taking things, I know Anne-Marie brought it back down to the fourth grade level, but without taking it things to like your 10th grade history class about why this country fought a bloody civil war, but can you take an antecedent from that era and say, look, there were states who thought that they should be able to enact laws that enslaved their fellow man, and the federal government said you can't do that. There was a secession and the war. We're not talking about that now, but I'm saying that the federal government does have options on the table should Texas try to circumvent the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution.
Sure, and we've seen this in recent judicial decisions and, as you mentioned, Supreme Court cases going back really to the founding period, so the whole sweep of U.S. history. So, you know, we have instances, so Arizona in 2012 passed a state law that had all sorts of state provisions and criminal penalties for unlawful presence in the United States, seeking work while not being authorized to do so. And Arizona's account of that was, well, we're just layering more state law on top of the federal law. And the Supreme Court struck down almost all of the provisions of that state law for precisely this reason. They said, listen, this is states frustrating federal law enforcement, even when they say they're layering it on top. They're actually frustrating it because it's up to the federal government to set these kinds of policies. And so, you know, it feels like these are things that are indeed ripped from the headlines now. But as you mentioned, you can go back to the Civil War period, certainly, and well before, and find examples of states, even in an era where everything was a lot looser, states asserting this kind of power, and the federal government, especially the Supreme Court, just completely pushing back and rejecting those kinds of arguments.
So ultimately, I know, Professor, you're not, you don't, politics is not your thing, but it does strike me that this is a game of politics, because ultimately, if you just start to think about it, for example, the Supreme Court just rejected the Supreme Court of Maine's decision to keep Donald Trump off the ballot in Maine. What we're basically saying is if Governor Abbott is able to do this in Texas, then in Maine they could say, well, you know what? We're thumbing our nose at the Supreme Court. We're keeping former President Trump off the ballot, and there's nothing you can do about it. In other words, it's this domino effect that I wonder if people are thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, that's always the issue with these federalism questions, that people often have very strongly held views when they are either the party in power or the party or group that's sort of not in power and then asserting local and state power. But the situation can always flip. And I think another point is it's very striking to see a Republican state governor who clearly has political ambitions defy this Supreme Court with its conservative supermajority. I mean, I think that is a real kind of inconsistency and an interesting thing that I think one can note and say, right, what is the theory here of why one should obey the Supreme Court? I mean, for lots of good reasons in U.S. constitutional law, but we see the arguments being made that seem like they are very inconsistent in applying that principle.
All right.
Really
Alison LaCroix, thank you so much.
Thank you.